So we're back here at the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, where we have a company of Israeli Merkava tanks on these twin hills. Have ambushed two companies of Syrian T-72s. It is the start of turn 5. The Israelis still have the initiative. I'm going to go ahead and call the game. I don't think the Syrians are going to survive another turn, primarily because we have two Merkava tanks in the same hex as 272s right here. The Israelis have the initiative, so that's going to be on the 5-to-1 table. Now, if it were just that, the Syrians might, well, I should say to win, the Israelis have to break the Syrian force. And to break the Syrian force, per scenario rules, they have to get 20 morale loss points. 20 morale loss points. And the Israelis have accumulated 18 right here. 18 right here. So this is 6 for one leader and 1 for each of these subordinate tanks. So this is 18 points right here. All the Israelis need is 2 more to break the Syrian force, which is the victory condition for the Israeli force in this scenario. The scenario is a test of arms. This battle set in 1982. So again, there's that close combat that the Syrians have a very small chance of surviving. And then on top of that, you have, all these Israeli forces ready to attack this T-72 that's already damaged, this damaged T-72 which is out in the open, and then and on top of that, the Israelis have rained their indirect fire, their off-board artillery, down onto this stack of 2 Syrian T-72s, one of which is the other commander. So loss of just that commander, game over for the Israelis to win. Otherwise, 2 more of these other tanks eliminated this turn, and the Israelis win, have met their victory condition. So for those reasons, the scenario goes 8 turns. So including the current turn, which we're just starting, I mean, the Israelis have 4 turns to achieve those victory conditions, so I don't think the Syrians have a realistic chance. Now, having taken a break from Test of Arms here for a bit, has allowed me to reflect on the game, what I've seen of the rules here. Now, obviously, I'm very familiar with all of the first battle mechanics, so it was interesting to play with a 1d6 CRT, but I definitely prefer the 1d10 CRT. The 1d6 just had, I'm not sure how to put it, but the 1d10 just seems to be more fun to play on. The terrain effects chart definitely cannot go for a single movement point cost per terrain for all units. I like the later breakout in the series where you go to tracked, leg, wheeled, and restricted wheel movement classes. I think now obviously a company of Merkava tanks set in. They all get to start in firing position. They all get to set up concealed. Versus the 2 Syrian T-72 companies, which cannot do either of those things at the scenario start. Hell, helps the Israelis a lot. Those Merkavas definitely have the edge in defensive value, armor defensive value. So those Merkavas with the defensive value of 9 versus 7, that seemed to be fairly significant. But actually, I didn't realize how significant the range would be. So a range factor. So even though the T-72 has a range of 8 and the Merkava is 10, and that's only a 2 hex difference, it's actually fairly significant since close range is 4 or less for the T-72, 5 or less for the Merkava, and it just seemed like there were quite a few shots, especially in here. Especially in here, where between here, all these shots in here, where it was 1 or 2 hexes off of a tank firing and being either in regular range or close range, and that close range doubling the combat power, the direct fire attack factor, seemed to also be fairly significant. So again, to compare Merkava to T-72, so if the Merkava gets close range and doubles his 8 to 16 against 7 for the T-72 in the open, that's 2 to 1. If the T-72 is in woods or town and gets the +3, then it goes to 16 against 10, which is just 1 to 1. If the T-72 gets close range, 20 to 9, again 2 to 1. The Merkava gets into defensive terrain, 9 becomes a 12, 20 to 12 is still just 1 to 1. But then, nope, that's the same too. So both of them at normal range, if the target is in defensive terrain, it's 1 to 2. It's 1 to 2 for the Merkava at normal range against the T-72 in defensive terrain, and vice versa. So actually, there's really not that much difference between these. So I guess starting off in firing position probably has a bit more influence than I was even thinking already. And then the Syrians lost a leader unit on this side of the battlefield fairly early, making almost the entire, or if not the entire company over here, start rolling for command control. But that aside, for this, well, I should say the Syrians destroyed 2 Merkava tanks, and they also damaged, we have a damaged Merkava here, and a damaged Merkava here. So they destroyed 2 and damaged 2. And don't forget that the damaged vehicles have their combat value. So the damaged T-72 goes to 5, the damaged Merkava goes to 4. Yeah. Now I think I think the Syrians getting in close here, I think, was a good call. They needed to follow it up with another echelon, which they were actually very close to doing. So the Syrians have to get in close. Starting out here in the open on these roads, they have to get to cover quickly, and they need to close the distance quickly to get in close to the Merkavas to get those same hex combat situations. If they can do that, they have a chance. So the leadership difference is significant. You have 18 subordinate Syrian T-72s and only 2 leaders, whereas you have six subordinate Merkava, or yeah, 6 subordinate Merkavas, and you have 4 leaders, company commander and 3 platoon leaders. So what that means is that both sides, maybe these should not be fixed, but anyways, I mean, both sides lose 6 morale loss points for losing a leader. That's just 4 opportunities out of 10 for but for going after targets to hit a leader on the Israeli side. And okay, so the Israeli morale, the hesitation point is 10. So there are 10 Israeli Merkava tanks. So forcing the Israelis to the hesitation point, you're not going to get there just by destroying individual subordinate tanks. But basically, if you're able to knock out 2 leaders, you're at 12 points. Israelis hit their hesitation point, and the Syrians seize the initiative, which means that they get to determine player turn order. Could the Syrians use that to their advantage? Well, in this scenario, the Israelis never lost the initiative, so I wonder, looking back, I wonder how much of an influence this was. It definitely factored into the Israeli decisions, but how much of an effect it actually had, I'm not actually too sure about that. But in any case, Syrians should, of course, try to push the Israelis to the hesitation point, and then get the initiative and try to use it. Now, the Israeli break point is 15, so that's really, well, that's 3 leaders. That might be a bit much to get 3 out of the 4 leaders. But if you get 2 of the leaders, that's already 12 points. So 2 of the leaders and 3 of the subordinates, Merkavas, and that is roughly half the Merkava force. So that's roughly half the Merkava force. The Assyrians were on their way, a little more than halfway to that halfway point of destroying half of the Israeli force. So it was not a complete blowout, even though there are all these destroyed vehicles out here, these burning wrecks, smoking wrecks. Wasn't a complete blowout as much as it appears here. So playing Test of Arms here, it was fun. It was definitely fast playing, and the game is advertised as I mean, it's advertised as, or maybe I'm thinking of the other game, but it is fast playing. It's definitely fun. Looking at the scenarios is just again fascinating to consider some of these. What stood out to me is the Arab-Israeli wars scenarios. So we have We have one from the 48, a scenario from the 48 war. One scenario from the 56 war, the Sinai War. Yeah, one from the 67 war, Six-Day War, and one from the October War or Yom Kippur War. Yeah, really interesting. The Indo-Pakistani Wars. This one actually looks interesting. The recapture of Uri. This looks interesting because the Indians have, in addition to 2 reinforced rifle companies, they have a tank platoon of 4 M5 tanks and a platoon of Daimler armored cars. Looks interesting. And then Libya versus Egypt. This Hellfire Pass Revisited actually looks interesting too. Egyptians versus Libyans. Interesting, straightforward objective, similar to one we just played actually. The Egyptians seek to inflict maximum casualties on the Libyan 3rd Armor Brigade. They have leftover World War II mines as a special scenario rule. 10 turns, so it's not going to go on and on. I like that this is, the Egyptians have a mechanized and mechanized infantry mixed, and BMP, and a MiG-23 air support. Interesting mix. And then Libyans have a straight tank company. And the Egyptians have off-board artillery. All very interesting. This is actually one to consider playing next. Libya versus Chad, bunch of armed Toyota trucks. Indo-Chinese War. There's one from the 1954 from Dien Bien Phu. Yeah, Dien Bien Phu. Interesting. Then we have an ambush on Highway 1. This actually looks interesting. Viet Cong and Americans in 1966. That is interesting because the American force comes in. We're talking a bunch of M113s, infantry, 2 AH-1 helicopters, and 2 F-100 fighter bombers. And yeah, so that one's pretty straightforward too, and with an interesting so winning. Trucks are worth 1 point each. If the US player has more points worth of trucks remaining at the end of the scenario than the Viet Cong player has destroyed, the US wins. Trucks can only exit the eastern side of the map. You have a long, slender map there. And how many... where are they? Yeah, one to take a closer look at. Defense of Long Bay, 1968. Persian Gulf War. So this is October 1980, early on in the Iran-Iraq War. Another one, 1982. The Road to Basra, 1985. This is really interesting for me. We have 3 scenarios from the Soviets in Afghanistan. So the Kunar Valley campaign, using the Soviets have access to chemical warfare, artillery delivered, chemical weapons. Then we have the Savang Highway, 1982, Afghani rebels. The Afghani rebels here have a SAM team, Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns. And then the Relief of Khost. This looks like the Relief of Khost here. This looks like a basically breaking a siege. Soviet forces must break through the Afghan rebel lines in order to relieve the siege of Khost. Looking at all these forces packed onto one map, this looks dense. So Afghani rebels have a battalion commander, a SAM team, 20mm anti-aircraft gun, machine guns, AT-4 teams, and 3 infantry companies, 4 mines, and 2 multiple rocket launcher fire missions off-board as off-board artillery. And then you have the Soviets bring on a tank company, 2 companies of dismounted mechanized infantry, 1 Mi-24E helicopter, and 1 Su-25 fighter bomber, all packed onto one map. And then we have 3 sections called infantry scenarios. There's one from, which looks pretty interesting actually, the Sandinistas versus Contras. Then you have the Battle of Goose Green from the Falklands War, and the assault on, or rescue at Grenada during the Grenada campaign. So that's all very interesting and worth coming back to this game again. Now, so this play really was fun, and it all kind of worked. Now I'll say that I wonder if this isn't dependent on the fact that this was all armor, direct fire, point targets. I really want to see how the game is going to play adding dismounted units. I really want to see how this works, so I might choose one of these scenarios and play it that has a mixed, have a fully mounted armored force on one side, and then the other side is a mixture of troop and armored vehicle units. Real quickly, so you got the, again, you got your Merkava and T-72 from this game, Test of Arms. I was wondering if these half-inch counters were going to be too small. And I'll tell you from my play here, not at all. I actually liked them because you'll see they're pretty easy to manipulate in the hexes. Pretty easy, darn easy to manipulate. Now later on, we go from Test of Arms that we played here to Sands of War, and Sands of War goes to the larger counters. So you have your T-72 from a Test of Arms, and then you go to a T-72 Golf from Sands of War. And then your Merkava, and then we go to, here's a Centurion tank from a Sands of War. Obviously the bigger counters are nicer to manipulate with fingers and everything, but it does get a little, I mean, to put them side by side in the hexes is really pushing it. So yeah, I was surprised that the half-inch counters from a Test of Arms really wasn't an issue at all. The stacks too. I mean, stacking in a Test of Arms up to 4 vehicles. And I assumed from the rules that was up to 4 vehicles per side. We're talking 8 vehicles. Each of those could have so we're talking 8 counters there. Each of those could be damaged with a damaged marker underneath. I should point out that when we go to Sands of War, the back side is the damaged side, so you don't have separate markers. You just flip it, it is damaged, it's shown as damage, and all of the values are already computed for you. Firepower is cut in half and movement values halved. So that's kind of nice. But here in Test of Arms, so we're talking you could have 8 vehicles in that hex. Whoops, that's destroyed. That's the wrong one. I'm showing the wrong one. Each of those could be damaged. Now you're up to 16, and really after that, unlimited non-vehicle units. And again, each of those, however many troop units you have, your troop units, of course we didn't have those in this scenario at all, okay, but in Test of Arms, you're putting a pin marker underneath the, they don't specify, but actually I put damaged marker underneath the vehicles because it's permanent. I'm going to put pin markers on top of the troop units because these are removed after a full turn. So, but anyways, separate pin markers. When you go to Sands of War, the troop units actually have you flip them over to the back side, they have their pinned side. Just like the vehicles in Sands of War have their damaged sides. But back here, several years earlier in the evolution, a Test of Arms is using pin and damaged markers. Yeah, fun, and definitely enjoyed this play, and I'm happy I got this scenario out on the table, played it through. This early iteration of the rules plays out. That's all for now.